Tonight on Nation to Nation, close to 8 decades ago, the federal government forcibly relocated an Inuit community in Nunavut. On Thursday, the Minister of Northern Affairs apologized.
So that bond that exists was broken and in some cases never found again.
Federal Liberal leadership candidates participated in televised French and English debates this week, but Indigenous issues didn't get much mention.
There was 90 seconds in 2 hours out of each debate where they talked about Indigenous issues.
A First Nation in Quebec is hailing a federal court decision on a proposed nuclear waste dump northwest of Ottawa.
It is an important precedent in the fact that UNDRIP needs to be applied immediately.
Welcome to Nation to Nation. I'm Fraser Needham. This afternoon, Minister of Northern Affairs Gary Anasonagiri was in Arctic Bay, Nunavut, to apologize to relatives and families of the Inuit people of Kingate, Nunavut, formerly Cape Dorset, who were forcibly relocated by the Canadian government between 1934 and 1948, causing years of hardship and trauma. The apology was made alongside the Dundas Harbour Relocation Society. Minister Anasonagiri joins me now. Welcome back to Nation Nation, Minister.
Good to be here, Fraser.
Great. So can you first tell our viewers, I guess, why the Inuit of Kingate were relocated?
Sure. As for a number of reasons. First and foremost, Canada was asserting Arctic sovereignty. There's also issues around a trading post run by the Hudson's Bay Company. There was a need to have a population that did go to the far north. So, as part of the efforts to ensure there's sovereignty in the north, the Canadian government essentially enticed for families to relocate to Dundas Harbour with the promise that they will be returned to their home community of Kingate 2 years later. But that didn't happen. There were a number of relocations since then. This happened in 1934. There was another one in 1936. Initially, they were supposed to go back to Kingate, but they were moved to Arctic Bay, from there to Fort Ross and to Spence Bay in 1948. So there's been a number of displacements. Throughout the displacements, people passed away. People's lives were altered. Their kinship and their relationship to their traditional areas, as well as their family ties, were broken. And over time, this has impacted many of those survivors. There's one survivor that will be that's part of the apology, but there's many others who are descendants of survivors who are very much moved by this experience, and we're setting a historically negative thing into an opportunity to reset the relationship that we have with the Inuit overall.
Now, I can only imagine some of the traumas this might have caused, but maybe you can outline some of the what you're aware of that this did cause to the community.
Look, it's first of all, displacement causes an enormous amount of loss of traditional fishing, hunting grounds that they've hunted and fished for thousands of years. There's displacement in terms of kinship, so their relations, they had to leave many of their relations behind, so that bond that exists was broken and in some cases never found again, because people, it's a vast area of land, and people never went back to their traditional land, so they forever missed those relationships. This has also caused, because the multiple displacements, a lack of permanency, a lack of foundation, and all of it happened without the informed consent of the families that were moved. So that's also had impact intergenerationally. And when we speak about colonialism and what Canada needs to do to reconcile, one of the major things is about telling the truth, and acknowledging the realities of what happened. And we've done that on a range of issues, including residential schools, and now in this case, forced relocation. This is not the only community that was forcefully relocated. There's others as well, but I believe that the far north is consequential, especially in this moment as we talk about Arctic sovereignty. And oftentimes we hear politicians and others who may want to impose their will and their perception of what they need to do to protect the Arctic onto the Inuit and those living in the north, which is completely unacceptable. And this is a gentle reminder that we just can't continue to make the same mistakes of the past.
Now, of course, we understand there's some compensation involved as part of this. I know it probably can never make up for what's happened, but what do you hope it will give the people of the Inuit community there, or what may happen with it?
Look, major in a lot of the work that I do, major component of my work involves um, essentially reparations, acknowledging past wrongs, and also find a way to compensate. And I realize that compensation is not the issue. And in this case, apology was important. The fact that the truth comes out, the Canadians will understand the truth and know what happened to them, I think is important to them. And it is important to the survivors and their descendants that the federal government acknowledges and in doing so says that we're not going to make the same mistakes again. Having said that, the compensation does involve a healing component, something that hopefully will, enable the communities to both acknowledge the harm through a monument of sorts, as well as healing and closure that'll be required for them in order for us to move forward on a nation-to-nation relationship.
Now, I know whenever you do one of these apologies or similar sort of things, the question always comes up, why did it take the government so long to apologize? So I'm going to ask you that question again. Why has it taken so long, so many years, this was a long time ago, to apologize?
Fraser, I've had this role for 3 months, and in my world, I'm working at lightning speed to get this done because I know how important it is. As a government since 2015, we have made some very important strides towards reconciliation, towards addressing past harms. And I can tell you there's still outstanding issues that we're working through. There'll be something major coming out next week as well. But for us, this is a very important moment. I never look back to say, ask a question why, why it took so long. My question is always, what's next? What else do we need to do? And where else is the harm that was caused that we need to acknowledge and to support communities and survivors and nations to move forward.
Okay, well, we'll have to leave it there. I know it's a very busy day for you, so we really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us.
Thanks, Fraser. Have a good day.
After the break, I'll talk to APTN reporter Karen Pugliese about the Liberal leadership debates this week and where Indigenous issues fit in. Welcome back. It's getting down to the final days before Liberal Party members elect their next leader, who will also be the Prime Minister of Canada. Canada's held the televised leadership debates in English and French this week, but Indigenous issues and reconciliation were scarcely mentioned. APTN reporter Karen Pugliese has been following the leadership race closely, and she joins me in studio today. Welcome back to Nation Nation.
Thanks for having me.
Great. So I know you've been soliciting questions from our viewers about what they would ask the Liberal leadership candidates. Why have you decided to do this?
Yeah, because as you mentioned, there were so few questions in the leadership debate. And we did put an offer out to leadership candidates to come on APTN. And a few of them accepted it. So now we just thought, let's collect questions from our viewers, things that are really important to them. We're going to take 10 questions. And we are going to send them to each of the candidates and give them a time to respond. So there's still time to get those in. We're still collecting them. So, if you're out there, please send your questions to news@aptn.ca. And let us know if we can use your name and your city, human beings out there watching.
Right. It should be really interesting to see what people actually have to say about this. Yeah, because it's we're in the final days, as we mentioned.
Oh yeah, APTN's done that before, and the best questions always come from the viewers.
Right. So I know that there was, in your story, you mentioned that there was really not much mention, and we mentioned in the intro of what they did talk about Indigenous issues. Anything that's struck you?
Yeah, yeah. Well, there really wasn't much. Like there was the French debate, the English debate. There was 90 seconds in 2 hours out of each debate where they talked about Indigenous issues. And, Chrystia Freeland mentioned the $5 billion Indigenous Loan Guarantee Program that she worked on. And it was literally like very quick like that. Like we need economic reconciliation. We need to include Indigenous people in energy. And then Karina Gould talked about the Indigenous Early Learning and Childcare Initiative, and really played up, like the Liberals have been the party of reconciliation with Indigenous people, and said she would not leave that behind. But if you want to know what really struck out to me, it was the fact that Mark Carney didn't say anything. Did not say anything, and especially after Jaime Baptiste threw his support behind him, not a single word, and Frank Baylis either. So what stuck out to me is the fact that even when given that opportunity where they could have jumped in and just said their one sentence, they didn't take it.
Now, of course, we talked before that economic reconciliation has been something both that Carney and Freeland, that's their background, they've mentioned it. Have they fleshed anything out really, though, since the last time we talked? Have they really said anything of what that means?
No, I mean, we know Mark Carney because he, used to go to places and engage with Indigenous businesses and talk about economic reconciliation and his version of it. And it was always, that he was balancing things with climate. And the question is what changes now? Because now we're in a different political world with the new government of Donald Trump down south starting to threaten tariffs. What is this going to mean for energy exportation, like pipeline and pipelines getting oil to other markets, meaning that they are now considering rebuilding some of these pipelines? What's going to happen to that balance with climate in Carney's mind? And really, Freeland, she's also. She came into the race, and I think we've talked about this before, having been finance minister. So she was giving out a lot of money to programs, but she wasn't running those programs. And she wasn't, really directly engaging with Indigenous people. A lot of her ministries before that had been involved with foreign affairs or foreign trade, not so much domestically. So we're still waiting to see how she's thinking she's going to engage with First Nations and what her version of economic reconciliation is.
Now, of course, the Donald Trump and the U.S. and the Trump tariff threats has been dominating everything in the news cycle. It's dominated this Ontario election campaign. It's dominating the Liberal leadership campaign. It's dominating everything. Now, how is this actually sort of playing, how is this affecting Indigenous people and, potential voters in this upcoming election once the Liberal leadership race is decided?
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I found funny, and I don't know if you're seeing this down your social media feeds, but I certainly am, is that I'm seeing a lot of First Nations people, even sovereigntists, suddenly doing Buy Canada. And I guess it's better the colonizer you know than the colonizer you don't. And there's these kind of conversations going on when did we become so pro-Canada? But, it exactly is that. We probably do have a better deal with whatever government comes up in Canada than we would as a 51st state of the U.S. But it also shifted the entire race. So, Indigenous people might have been more present in the conversations and the debates and the minds of the Liberal leadership hopefuls had it not been from Trump coming in. The issues at the time, before all this happened, before Trudeau resigned, we thought the election was going to be about, do you hate Trudeau or do you hate Poilievre? And carbon tax or carbon rebate, depending on your politics, it's a carbon tax to the Conservatives, a carbon rebate to the Liberals. That whole policy, that whole climate change policy has been dropped. None of the candidates are talking about it. So here we are now. Number one issue is Donald Trump. The tariffs can affect Indigenous business. They could affect, say, the snow crab industry. They could affect Indigenous groups that are harvesting lumber and shipping that down to the States. Those are two key areas. I think the other thing that's coming up is maybe the burying of climate change. I think yet another thing coming up, the debates are very focused on who can defeat Poilievre. It's been more focused on Trump, but that's still a sub-theme. And I think the thing for Indigenous people is with the Liberals going back up in the polls, because there were two key polls that came out that showed the Liberals rising. One of them showed the Liberals ahead of the Conservatives, which is the first time in years that's been true. So will Indigenous people go out to vote ultimately for Liberals? Do they think they can get a better deal under Liberals than Conservatives? I've heard from some chiefs that remember the Harper cuts to programs, and they're a little worried about it. But, you know, Polyev has been reaching out to First Nations at least about economic development.
Great. Well, sounds like interesting times, and so much you have to, no shortage of news stories to work on. So thanks for taking time out of your schedule to talk to us.
Always happy to be here with you.
Up next, we'll talk to Quebec First Nation Chief Lance Haymond about a new federal court decision on the proposed nuclear waste disposal site at Chalk River, Ontario. Welcome back. Last week, the Quebec First Nation in Quebec won a major court decision after a federal judge ruled the Canadian Nuclear Safety Commission failed in its duty to provide free, prior, and informed consent to area Algonquin nations prior to approving plans for a nuclear waste disposal site at the Chalk River facility about 150 kilometers northwest of Ottawa. Joining me today to talk about the decision is Lance Haymond, Chief of the Quebec First Nation. Welcome back to Nation, Chief Haymond.
Good morning, and thanks again for the opportunity.
So now, even though the NSC held a number of meetings that included, of course, First Nations prior to approving this disposal site, it failed in its UNDRIP responsibilities. Maybe you can just explain for our viewers exactly why that is so.
Well, again, if, going back, we've been, speaking out against this project since 2015, and in particular, we have always expressed our concerns and preoccupations around the government's efforts in consulting us on this important project. And then ultimately, when UNDRIP was adopted in 2021, we recognized that there were significant principles under the United Nations Declaration's rights to Indigenous people, and that, some of those elements, given that Canada had adopted into law, should have applied in the CNSC's decision. And of course, CNSC acknowledged and confirmed that they did not take UNDRIP into consideration prior to the issuing of the license. Therefore, we challenged the decision through a judicial review, and Judge Blackhawk, reconfirmed and enforced the fact that consultation was inadequate between CNSC and Quebec.
Now, one thing that I thought was kind of interesting is that initially the CNSC had said it didn't really have any jurisdiction over UNDRIP, therefore it didn't really apply to the organization, but the judge disagreed. Is that going to change things going forward, do you think? Is that kind of groundbreaking?
We believe it is. Again, and in speaking with our legal advisors yesterday, it is an important precedent in the fact that UNDRIP needs to be applied immediately and not at some future time down the road. So it will most certainly have impacts on our case, but we believe it will also, move the goalpost, so to speak, when it comes to other First Nations who are confronted, by projects and development and want to have, a thorough consultation process.
Okay, and also, I guess on the other hand, the judge disagreed with the First Nations in terms of had CNSC properly weighed the environmental impacts of the dump. I guess you must find this maybe somewhat disappointing.
Well, again, you go into this process knowing that, the odds are stacked against you. You put forward your best arguments. And ultimately, yes, we would have liked to win in all of our cases, and in particular, this area where Judge Blackhawk disagreed, we wanted the project, stopped in its entirety. And she, in her decision, said that was unreasonable and that, we would simply go back to do more consultation. So we are disappointed that she did not go further than restart consultations and not start the process over from the beginning, because quite frankly, our issues and concerns have emanated from the very start of the process, where we were excluded, from being even able to comment on the environmental impact statement. So again, we are disappointed in one aspect, but again, hopeful that the elements where she rendered in our favor, we can now move forward in a process uh, that will provide, more clarity, to our members, so that they in turn can make an informed decision on this project.
And I probably should have asked you for our viewers. I know we've talked about it before, but there are a number of issues that not just the Algonquin nations, but other environmental groups. For example, there's a proximity to the Ottawa River, of course, levels of nuclear waste that you've raised concerns about, and also the species at risk. Did you want to say anything about that quickly?
Sure. Again, we're big part of the issue again with this project is, as you've noted, the proximity to the Ottawa River. It also has, an important impact on the existing biodiversity. We've clearly indicated that, there are a number of species at risk, and yet the Minister of the Environment still saw fit to issue a Section 73 permit, which would allow the proponent to go in and basically have a license to kill species at risk. And so we've appealed, that judicial review again as a way, as a continuation of our efforts in the fact that the site is an important biodiversity area, and we would like to have it preserved, given the fact that, government goes out of their way to develop laws for the protection of species, and yet when it's convenient or, economics rule, that the minister can simply, with a swipe of a pen, ignore, laws that Canada has adopted, and, for basically have a way around applying their own legislation. So we're going to continue that fight. We're still waiting on the judgment to be rendered in that case. The hearing was only on February 4th and 5th. So we'll see how it plays out. But in the meantime, we have a lot of work to do. Judge Blackhawk's setting the need to reach an agreement by September of 2026 does not give us a lot of time, although it seems, quite a ways in the distance. The huge amount of work and the complexities of dealing with a nuclear file, time will go by very, very fast. And we're hopeful that we can get done what we feel needs to get done in terms of what that new process will look like, and get some agreement, from CNSC and CNL to be able to move forward in a good way.
Okay, well, thanks for that. And that concludes this week's episode of Nation and Nation. If you missed any part of tonight's show, you can check out our podcast at aptnnews.ca/podcast. I'm Fraser Needham. Good night.